Hello everyone, welcome back. At the request of one of my subscribers, I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit today about revolver holsters, okay? Well, before I jump into revolver holsters, I want to quickly look at a modern day holster for a striker fired gun like this Glock 17, okay? So the holster is an important component of this pistol because that is the safety mechanism. The Glock 17 does not have a safety on it. It has a pretty light trigger, so I need a holster that will cover the trigger guard so I cannot accidentally activate the trigger while it's in the holster. Okay, so that's a very important component with modern day striker fired guns. You have to carry them in a hard Kydex holster like this. You can't use a leather one or a soft material one. It has to be a hard holster that covers the trigger guard and offers some form of retention. There's a screw over here that I can tighten or loosen up, and basically there's a little bit of retention there. Some modern holsters have a button that you got to push, but that's an important component to understand with modern day holsters from modern day striker fired guns. Now let's jump back into the cowboy era. Okay, some different concerns that they had at the time. Back then, almost all revolvers. They did have some double action revolvers, even in the Civil War era. But back then, most revolvers were single action only, which means that you had to manually pull the hammer back every time before you fired the gun. So the purpose of the holster was just to carry the gun. Okay. And an important component, of the holster of the late 1800s was that, if you're going to use this from a horse, you're probably going to be using it one-handed because you're using the other hand to steer the horse, right, to control the animal that you're riding on. So it was very likely that you were going to be using this one-handed. So they had a different mentality back then. They needed a trigger guard that was exposed, and often the trigger guards were actually pretty small, so that when you grabbed the pistol, you could actually get your finger immediately into the trigger guard, okay? And then this one has a retention strap over here. You would push this with your thumb to open it up, and then you would pull this out with your finger on the trigger, okay? Wrapped around so that you don't drop the gun while you're on your horse. And what you would do is you would typically point this up. Now, keeping your finger in the trigger guard, because again, I can only do this one-handed because the other hand's busy handling the horse. I would cock this back, okay? And then basically I can aim and drop, and fire by squeezing trigger. Now, mind you, you'll see me squeezing the trigger here, nothing is going to happen because the hammer has not been pulled back. Okay, so because these guns worked differently, they were single action only. It was not, basically it was preferable to have an exposed trigger guard where you could hook your finger in there, pull the gun out, okay, and use your finger to make sure that you don't drop your pistol, right? And then when you cocked back, you would kind of put your finger forward like that. Again, the concern is not dropping your pistol, okay? And then basically you could aim and fire, okay? So it's important to understand that mentality kind of carried over when we started using double action guns. So over here I have a modern double action gun. I think it's from the late 80s, early 90s, and this one is loaded. And when I bought this gun, I bought it used. It was probably a police trade-in or police. It was probably sold by police. Because back in the 90s there was a transition from revolvers to semi-automatic pistols, so all of a sudden you started seeing tons of these revolvers showing up in gun shops. So they were like almost in new condition that you could buy them really cheap. They came with the holsters. So again, this revolver that you see from the 90s, you can see that this the trigger and the trigger guard is exposed. Now these revolvers, because they're double action, they did have a stiff trigger pull. However, if you went in there and you pulled out You know, especially if you didn't release the retention strap and you're trying to pull this out. If your finger was actually in that guard as you were pulling this out, you were gonna shoot yourself in the foot. Okay, so the holster technology, okay, had not quite caught up with the gun technology, with the double action revolver technology. So, you know, when I bought this gun, because for a short while I was actually carrying this, I basically bought one of these Blackhawk holsters that covers the trigger guard and has a retention strap that goes over the top like that. Okay, and now this one has a trigger guard that is covered. Okay, and the reason is because, you know, like back in, let's say, the 70s, striker fire pistols were, you know, not common back then. So most triggers were exposed in the holsters. But by the 80s, you know, the Glock comes along and they figure out, okay, wait a second, that trigger is way too light. We need a different holster. You know, we need to come up with some other safety mechanism. So when I bought that gun, I was well aware that this holster was probably not going to be ideal for this revolver if I was going to carry it. So that's why I bought that other one. And this was a pretty cheap revolver. Pretty cheap. The revolver itself was cheap. I think I bought it for like $200. Just because, you know, back then cops were basically just throwing them away. They were just giving them to the gun shops. But I think the holster itself was something like $10 or $15. So it's a pretty cheap holster from Blackhawk. Does the job just fine. Okay. Over here I have examples of some other holsters. That again, I bought these at a gun show. I think they were like $5 each. Really good holster. Actually, this one's still marked. Look at this. Police trade-in holster, $5. Okay, still marked. You know, and you know, it's got a swivel on it. It's got, you know, it's a really good one. I mean, this probably cost $100. You know, or at least $60 when the guy bought it. Okay, because this is, you know, definitely like a high grade, you know, high grade holster. But yeah, but basically the trigger is exposed. When I take one of my other, I take a revolver, okay, and I stick it in there, you know, I can see that at least the trigger is somewhat exposed. It's got better cover. I mean, I think they started moving in the direction of, hey, maybe we need to cover that trigger up. So they added this little piece over here. It actually looks like it's actually removable. Okay, because some people didn't like having that extra piece. You know, they weren't used to holsters having that little extra piece there. So this piece is put here as an afterthought, or as a removable item, because just in case like you really couldn't stand it. Now, one of the things that I like to do is I like to make holsters. Holsters are easy, especially for revolvers. These are some of my black powder guns, and basically took some 6-ounce leather, just put, you know, flat piece like this over here. You know, basically you just take a piece of leather, put the gun down on it, kind of trace around the gun. You know, lay the gun on it, see if that kind of fits. Take another piece, put it on top of it, press it down, kind of trace it out. And what you'll do then is, you know, because basically you gotta kind of cut along, as you can see. You know, basically you start putting your rivets in. These are hammer rivets. You just, you know, you hammer them in, and you start working your way up and trimming away the extra pieces until you get your holster. Okay, and I've done this several times. Okay, this is the 44 Colt. Okay, this is left side. Okay, this is 1858 Remington. This is right side. Okay, as you can see, trigger guard exposed, because even though this gun is loaded, the caps are in. Trigger's dead until I pull that hammer back. Okay, and here's a smaller one that I made. This is a Colt 44, but this is a short barrel. This is like a 5-inch barrel. So I think they call these like the Sheriff's Special. You know, because basically it allowed for a slightly quicker draw. You know, supposedly, because as you're coming out, you can clear the holster a little bit faster. But the same idea here. You can see how how the trigger guard is exposed, and you know, again, you can see how I made this. Just took a piece of leather, basically made the triangle to match the revolver. You know, you can see the rivets there. Basically put put the another piece of leather on top of the revolver, folded it down, hammer these. Starting from the bottom, you kind of hammer up, get it nice and snug, and then you may have to do this a couple times until you get it perfect. It's not always going to come out perfect every time you do it, but really easy, cheap. It works. If I was going to be bouncing around, I would put a snap over here, a strap like this one has over here. Like this one. It's pretty easy. Just you just take another piece of leather. You put you put one rivet here, and then you put a snap buckle over here. You got it. Snap buckles are cheap. They go in just as easy as rivets. So there's some ideas about revolver holsters. If you guys have any questions, feedback, comment, put in the comment section. If you're not a member of the channel, subscribe. I'll see you guys soon.